Daniel Price had always trusted his instincts while traveling. A journalist for a mid-sized magazine, he thrived on chasing stories, digging up local legends, and staying in places most people wouldn't dare. It was late autumn when he drove across a long stretch of rural highway in the Appalachian Mountains, hunting down ghost stories for an upcoming feature. The sun had set hours ago, and mist had gathered low across the road. His GPS lost signal sometime after the last gas station. When the low fuel light blinked red, Daniel's pulse quickened. Civilization felt impossibly far away. He rolled down the window, cold night air rushing in, and for the first time all trip, he felt a genuine twinge of unease. That was when he saw it, a neon sign glowing faintly through the fog. The Ashwood Hotel, vacancy. Relief washed over him. The place appeared almost too perfect. A three-story building with Victorian architecture, ornate windows, and a wraparound porch. A soft orange glow seeped through the curtains. It looked alive, unlike the dozens of shuttered motels he had passed earlier. Daniel parked and grabbed his overnight bag. The gravel crunched under his boots as he approached the front doors. They opened with a groan before he touched them, and warm lamplight spilled across the lobby. The reception desk stood empty at first, but within seconds, a woman appeared, tall and pale, her black hair pinned neatly under a cap. She wore an old-fashioned uniform, the kind hotel clerks might have worn in the 1930s. "Good evening, Mr. Price," she said, her voice smooth, low. Daniel froze. "How do you know my name?" She smiled faintly. "We've been expecting you." The clerk handed him a brass key attached to an ornate fob with the number 217 engraved on it. "Enjoy your stay," she said. Daniel glanced around. The lobby had an elegance long gone from modern hotels. Velvet couches, oil paintings of stern men and sorrowful women, a fireplace that crackled warmly. Several guests lounged quietly. An older man in a dark suit reading a newspaper, a young couple whispering together on a couch, and a child staring blankly at the fire. Something about them felt muted, their faces pale, their movements deliberate, almost rehearsed. No one made eye contact. Daniel shook it off and carried his bag upstairs. Room 217 was beautiful. Antique furniture, polished to a gleam, four-poster bed with crimson sheets, and tall windows overlooking the fog-covered forest. For a place that didn't exist on his map, it was immaculate. He should have been grateful. Instead, a gnawing discomfort grew inside him. That night, as he lay in bed, he heard footsteps in the hallway, slow, dragging footsteps that passed his door, then returned, circling back and forth. When he opened the door, the hallway was empty, but when he glanced down at the carpet, he noticed something strange. Faint, wet footprints, bare feet, leading nowhere. At breakfast, Daniel sat in the dining hall with several other guests. The clerk from the night before poured him coffee. He tried to spark conversation with the others, but each guest responded in short, clipped sentences, eyes darting nervously to the corners of the room, as if afraid of being overheard. The young couple whispered endlessly to each other, but refused to acknowledge him. The child from the lobby sat alone, staring at a plate of food he never touched. Daniel leaned toward the man reading the newspaper. "Strange place, isn't it?" he asked. The man lowered the paper slowly. His eyes were gray, almost colorless. He leaned in close and whispered, "You need to leave before you forget who you are." Before Daniel could respond, The man stood, folded his newspaper, and walked out without another word. A chill ran down Daniel's spine. He suddenly noticed that the front page of the abandoned newspaper wasn't current. It was dated October 12th, 1937. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. The footsteps returned, louder this time. He pressed his ear to the door. A voice whispered, "Check out, check out, check out." His hand trembled as he unlocked the door. The hallway beyond seemed longer than before, stretching into impossible distance. The carpet pattern twisted, repeating itself endlessly, like a maze. At the far end stood a figure, a tall man in a bellhop's uniform, face shadowed. He lifted his arm slowly, pointing directly at Daniel's room. Then the hallway lights flickered, and the figure vanished. Daniel slammed the door shut, heart racing. The next morning, Daniel explored the second floor. The hallway smelled faintly of mildew, though every surface appeared spotless. The brass numbers on each door glimmered as if freshly polished. He paused at room 215. Unlike the others, its doorknob was chained shut with heavy iron links, a padlock dangling loosely. Carved into the wood above the lock were strange markings, symbols he didn't recognize, like crooked letters, scratched in desperation. He bent down to inspect, and suddenly the door rattled, violently, as if something inside hurled itself against it. Daniel stumbled back, nearly falling. The noise ceased as abruptly as it began. When he turned, the clerk stood at the end of the hall, expression unchanged. "Some doors," she said evenly, "are not meant to be opened." By the third night, Daniel noticed one of the guests had disappeared. The young couple still whispered on the couch. The child still stared blankly at the fire. But the man with the newspaper was gone. "Where's the gentleman from earlier?" Daniel asked the clerk. She tilted her head. "What gentleman?" "The one who was always reading in the lobby." Her lips tightened into something almost like a smile. "We've had no such guest, Mr. Price." Daniel glanced at the newspaper, left behind on the table. It was gone too, as if the man had never existed. In the lounge, Daniel studied the paintings hanging on the walls. Most depicted the hotel itself in various seasons. One large framed photograph caught his attention, a black and white group portrait of smiling guests gathered on the steps of the Ashwood Hotel. He leaned closer, squinting at the faded faces. His blood ran cold. There, near the edge of the group, was a man with glasses, holding a folded newspaper, the same man who had warned him. The date scrawled at the bottom of the photograph read, October 1937. That evening, Daniel dreamed, or thought he dreamed, of the man again. The hotel was empty in his vision, hallways stretching infinitely, shadows crawling along the walls. The man appeared at the end of the corridor, his voice thin and trembling. "You're becoming one of us. Every night you stay, you lose pieces. They'll take your face next, then your name. Don't sleep in this place. Don't eat their food. Leave before dawn, or you will never remember that you wanted to leave." Daniel awoke in a sweat, but the words echoed, alive in his mind. When he looked in the mirror above the dresser, his reflection seemed wrong. His eyes looked duller, his skin slightly paler, as if he were fading. Determined to uncover the truth, Daniel snuck through the hotel late at night. The clerk had vanished, and the guests were silent in their rooms. On the ground floor, he discovered a narrow stairwell behind a staff-only door. He descended into the basement, flashlight beam slicing through the dark. What he found froze him in place. The basement stretched into a cavernous hall, filled with suitcases, coats, and shoes piled high. Old trunks stamped with names and dates, decades old, some crumbling with decay. He picked up a wallet from the top of the heap. Inside was an ID card for a man named Harold Whitman. Issue date 1935. A whisper echoed across the basement. Check in, never check out. The pile of belongings shifted as though something massive moved beneath it. Daniel ran back upstairs, heart hammering. When he returned to the lobby, the child who always sat by the fire was gone. In his place sat the folded newspaper. Its headline read, Ashwood Hotel Fire, Claims 23 Lives. The date, October 14th, 1937. The article detailed how the entire hotel burned in a sudden blaze, trapping staff and guests inside. No survivors were ever found. Daniel looked up and saw the child standing across the room, staring at him with hollow black eyes. Smoke curled from his mouth as he whispered, You've already checked in. The air thickened with the smell of smoke. Daniel rushed to the front doors, but when he tried to push them open, they wouldn't budge. The wood felt hot beneath his palms. Through the glass panes, flames flickered outside, rising from the mist itself, wrapping the hotel in fire. Yet no heat reached him, only the illusion of burning, eternal. The guests calmly gathered in the lobby. The young couple held hands tightly, whispering faster now. The child stared at Daniel, soot smudging his pale cheeks. The clerk appeared behind the desk. Sit down, Mr. Price, she said gently, as though to a child. You're making it worse. Daniel fled upstairs, back to room 217. His reflection in the dresser mirror now bore subtle differences. Skin paler, eyes gray, lips thin. He touched his face, trembling. When he turned away and back again, the reflection no longer copied him. It remained still, smiling faintly. The reflection whispered, though Daniel's lips stayed shut, Stay. The fire cannot touch you if you stay. He threw a towel over the mirror and backed away. But behind the towel, faint scratching sounds continued, as if fingernails dragged along the glass. Daniel confronted the clerk the next morning. What is this place? He demanded. She regarded him with the same calm, practiced smile. A refuge, a sanctuary. Time doesn't move here, Mr. Price. Pain doesn't reach us. The world outside burns, but within these walls, you may rest forever. I don't want forever, Daniel spat. I want out. Her smile faltered for the first time. Few ever do, and fewer succeed. In the library, Daniel found an old guest ledger. The pages listed names in looping script, dated back to the 1900s. He flipped until he found a 1937. Every name was marked with a cross beside it. Deceased. Near the back, new pages continued. To his horror, he saw recent dates: 2005, 2011, 2019. Each name matched belongings he had seen in the basement piles. His hands shook as he turned to the very last page. There, freshly written in neat ink, Daniel Price, room 217. Panic surging, Daniel sprinted for the back exit near the kitchens. The heavy door creaked open to the night air. Cold, fresh, real. He stumbled outside into the fog, gasping with relief. But as he walked forward, he realized something impossible. The fog cleared, and before him stood the Ashwood Hotel. Its glowing windows beckoned, the sign buzzing faintly. He had come full circle. No matter which direction he ran, the hotel stood before him again, waiting. On his fifth attempt to escape, he collapsed on the gravel path. Footsteps approached. He looked up to see the bellhop, the same figure who had pointed at his door that first night. This time, the man's face was visible, burned, half skeletal, one eye melted shut. He leaned down, his ruined smile wide. "No one leaves, Daniel," he rasped. "We are ash, we are memory, and now, so are you." The bellhop reached out, and Daniel's vision dimmed as cold fingers pressed against his chest. In darkness, Daniel heard voices, the guests, the clerk, the child, all whispering together, "Stay with us, stay with us, stay with us." But another voice cut through, the man with the newspaper. "Don't listen. Burn with us or live. Choose." Daniel opened his eyes to see the hotel ablaze, fire roaring through the halls, consuming curtains and portraits. Guests screamed as flames devoured them, yet their faces remained calm, almost relieved. The man with the newspaper extended his hand through the fire. "This is the truth, Daniel. The fire never ended, but if you run through it, if you accept the pain, you might still wake up." Daniel charged forward, through the inferno. Fire seared his lungs, his skin blistering. He screamed, stumbling blindly. Every nerve begged him to stop, but he pushed, crashing through collapsing beams. Past burning furniture, he threw himself toward a window, shattering the glass as flames swallowed the room behind him. He hit the ground hard, cold, wet grass beneath him. When he opened his eyes, he was lying beside his car on the rural highway. The mist had lifted. His gas light still blinked red. The hotel was gone. Shaking, Daniel drove to the nearest town and collapsed in a diner. Locals gathered around as he stammered out his story. An older man nodded grimly. "Ashwood Hotel, burned down in 37. Folks say travelers still see it when the fog rolls thick. Some check in, few ever check out." Daniel tried to laugh, but his chest ached, burned. When he pulled up his shirt, his skin bore faint scars, shaped like fingers pressed deep into his flesh. Back at his apartment, weeks later, Daniel began writing his article. But every morning, new photographs appeared on his desk. Old sepia-toned group shots of Ashwood Hotel guests. Each day, one more detail shifted, a sleeve, a shadow, a blurred face, until one morning, Daniel dropped the latest photo in horror. There he was, standing at the edge of the group, pale, unsmiling, holding a folded newspaper. The caption read, "Ashwood Hotel, October 2023. The house on Hollow Creek." Emily Cartwright had never been to Hollow Creek. She had only seen it on a map, a small pinprick of a town tucked deep in the mountains. Yet when her lawyer called with the news that she had inherited a property from a distant relative she had never met, she felt compelled to see it. The house was called Ravenwood Manor, a sprawling structure of gray stone and warped timber, half hidden by thick fog and towering pines. As her car wound down the narrow, twisting road, Emily felt a chill in the air, not from the cold, but from something intangible, as if the forest itself was watching her approach. When she arrived, the house was quiet, abandoned. Windows stared back at her like blank eyes. The front door creaked open under her touch, revealing a grand foyer layered with dust and cobwebs. Faded portraits of somber-looking people hung on the walls, their eyes seeming to follow her. Emily wandered through the house, exploring rooms frozen in time. In the dining hall, long tables still bore tarnished silverware. In the library, Shelves of leather-bound books rose to the ceiling, the air thick with mildew and the scent of aged paper. Upstairs, the bedrooms were similarly preserved. One room had a doll propped in a chair, its porcelain face cracked, a single eye missing. Another contained a cradle with dried leaves inside, as if someone had forgotten a child or replaced it with something else. The fog outside pressed against the windows, moving unnaturally. Emily shivered. Despite the house's emptiness, it felt alive. That night, Emily slept in a guest bedroom with a heavy four-poster bed. She awoke at 3:17 a.m., hearing footsteps above her. Soft, deliberate, pacing. She told herself it was the old house settling, yet the sound came again, closer to her door. A whisper grazed her ear. "Welcome home." Emily bolted upright, but no one was there. The whisper echoed again, seeming to come from every corner at once. Sleep became impossible. Shadows in the corners of her eyes shifted when she looked away, and the air felt thick, almost viscous, as if the house itself breathed around her. The next day, Emily ventured into Hollow Creek. The town was small, old, and quiet. Locals eyed her with suspicion, but offered little conversation. When she asked about Ravenwood Manor, they exchanged uneasy glances. One old man said quietly, "Nobody stays there long. The house, it remembers, and sometimes it isn't kind to those it doesn't recognize." Emily smiled politely, trying to hide the tremor in her hands. But as she returned to the house that evening, she could sense the fog pressing heavier, curling around her tires, into her lungs. On the third night, Emily discovered a hidden staircase in the library, a spiral leading to the attic. Dust swirled around her as she ascended. The attic was cramped, filled with trunks, old paintings, and furniture draped in moth-eaten sheets. Among the trunks, she found a journal belonging to her great-aunt, Cecilia Cartwright. The entries were odd, rambling about voices in the walls, mirrors that trapped memories, and shadows that moved even when no one was watching. One line sent chills down Emily's spine. "The house keeps its history alive. Those who enter never truly leave, and it always remembers the living." That night, Emily awoke to the sound of scratching, not at the window, but beneath the floorboards. She pressed her ear to the wood, hearing muffled voices calling her name. The shadows in the room lengthened unnaturally. They pooled in corners, moving like liquid. Her candle flickered violently, and she felt something brush her arm, a cold, invisible touch that made her scream. When she turned on the light, the room appeared normal, yet a photograph on the dresser had changed. Her face, pale and frightened, stared back at her as if from the past. Emily spent the following day researching the Cartwright family in the local archives. What she found was unsettling. Over the past 2 centuries, nearly every Cartwright who inherited Ravenwood Manor vanished mysteriously. Some were found years later, muttering incoherently about voices in the walls. Others were never seen again. The locals murmured that the house had a will of its own, feeding on family bloodlines, memories, and fear. As she left the archives, Emily noticed the sky darkening unnaturally fast. The fog rolled into the streets, swallowing Hollow Creek. Returning to the house, Emily entered the dining room and froze. A figure stood at the far end, tall, featureless, draped in shadows. She screamed. The figure raised its hand slowly, then vanished. In the fireplace, A journal burned spontaneously, leaving ashes that spelled her name, Emily Cartwright. Her pulse raced. She tried to leave, but the front door had vanished. In its place was a solid wall of wood and fog. Emily stumbled back from the fireplace, heart pounding. The walls seemed to pulse, as if the house itself were breathing. Soft whispers filled the air, indistinct at first, then slowly forming words. You belong here. Stay. Never leave. She pressed her hands to her ears, but the whispers grew louder, louder than her own thoughts. The shadows in the corners lengthened and twisted, forming shapes that resembled the figures in her great aunt Cecilia's journal. Her candle flickered and went out. Darkness enveloped her completely. She could feel the floor shifting under her feet, the house's heartbeat matching her own. Emily remembered Cecilia's warnings about mirrors. She ran to the hallway and confronted a full-length mirror at the end. Her reflection was wrong. First, her eyes were darker, hollow. Then, her mouth moved independently, whispering, Stay, join us, be remembered. Emily turned away, gagging. But when she glanced back, the mirror was blank empty glass, but a faint whisper followed her down the hallway. She realized the house recorded her, copied her, tried to consume her identity. On the second floor, Emily discovered a door she hadn't seen before. It had a rusted iron lock, but the keyhole pulsed as if alive. She tried the handle. It opened without resistance. Inside was a room completely empty, except for an old rocking chair. It creaked back and forth, though no one sat in it. As she stepped closer, she saw faint footprints leading to the wall. The wall itself rippled, as if made of liquid. From it emerged a shadowy figure, her great aunt Cecilia, pale and twisted, eyes dark pools. They remember, they consume. Run while you can, the apparition whispered. Emily stumbled back, nearly tripping over herself. In the hallway, she noticed every portrait along the walls had changed. Her ancestors' faces twisted in agony. Some had mouths sewn shut, some eyes black as coal. In every painting, a figure resembling Emily appeared, her expression frozen in terror. She touched one of the frames. Her hand sank through the glass into cold, pulsing matter. She yanked it out, gasping. Something had tried to pull her inside. The house was alive, feeding on the bloodline, and now it had claimed her attention. The fog outside thickened unnaturally, seeping through cracks in the walls and windows. It formed into shapes, faces of the missing Cartwrights, their mouths open in silent screams. They drifted closer, pressing against her windows, reaching for her. Emily realized that leaving was impossible while the house remained. She tried to escape through the back door, but it had vanished. The main entrance was now a solid wall of stone, cold and impenetrable. Panic surged as she screamed. No sound came out. The fog pressed closer. Remembering the journal, Emily ventured into the basement. The steps were steep, the air dank and suffocating. The basement was filled with trunks, old furniture, toys, and photographs of those who had vanished before her. One trunk rattled violently. Emily hesitated, then opened it. Inside lay a folded dress, soaked in decay. She recognized it instantly. It belonged to her great aunt Cecilia. A whisper echoed from the trunk. You cannot leave. Not now. Not ever. The room pulsed, walls contracting. Shadows crawled along the floor like living things. Emily barely escaped, slamming the basement door behind her. In the grand hall, an enormous grandfather clock ticked backward. Each strike of the bell echoed through the house, reverberating in Emily's chest. Suddenly, The hands on the clock began to move rapidly, spinning through years, decades. She saw flashes of every Cartwright who had inherited the house, their terror, their last moments. The final image froze her in place. Emily herself, trapped in the clock's face, screaming silently. Emily understood what she had to do. The house wanted her to stay, to join the lineage of the trapped. To survive, she needed to reject it entirely, even at the risk of her own mind. She gathered her courage, ran to the center of the house, and yelled, "I am not yours." The shadows recoiled. The whispers screamed. The fog thickened into a cyclone inside the hall. The house groaned, as if in pain. The walls shook. Portraits fell. Mirrors shattered. The grandfather clock shattered into pieces. Emily burst through what had been the front door. Sunlight hit her face. She stumbled down the driveway, gasping for air. Behind her, Ravenwood Manor loomed, fog curling from the windows, shadows writhing. But she felt the first sense of freedom in days. She reached her car, hands shaking, and drove away from Hollow Creek as fast as she could. The town itself seemed to vanish behind her, swallowed by mist. Back in the city, Emily tried to resume normal life, but she felt the house everywhere, in mirrors, in shadows, in the fog that rolled across the streets. Nightmares followed her, visions of the trapped Cartwrights, hollow-eyed and silent, their mouths whispering her name. Photographs of Ravenwood Manor appeared in her apartment unbidden. Old journals she hadn't opened were on her desk. Each day, they seemed closer, more insistent. Emily understood the terrible truth. The house didn't exist in space. It existed in time and memory. It would follow her until the end of her days. Emily moved far away, changed her name, avoided towns near forests. Yet sometimes, on foggy nights, she glimpsed a shadow at the edge of her window, a figure rocking in a chair, and always, faintly, the whispering reached her ears. "Welcome home, Emily. Welcome home." Ethan Monroe had been hosting The Midnight Signal, a late-night radio show that specialized in the unexplained, the eerie, and the paranormal, for over 5 years. His station, WLXR, was tucked into a corner of a sleepy town where most listeners were insomniacs, truckers, and conspiracy enthusiasts. One night, just past midnight, Ethan was finishing a segment on abandoned hospitals when the phone line lit up. A shaky voice whispered, "Do you hear us? Do you see what's coming?" Ethan chuckled. Probably a prank, like the last 10 calls. But the voice continued, unamused. "They are watching. They know. You must warn them." The line went dead. Ethan frowned and looked at the clock. It was 12:17 a.m., the exact time the last host before him had mysteriously disappeared, according to station lore. Within minutes, the phone rang again. This time, multiple voices spoke at once, overlapping. They spoke in tongues he couldn't understand, yet somehow he felt their meaning: dread, warning, and something approaching, inevitable. The audio board flickered, lights in the studio dimmed. Ethan's stomach twisted. His producer had left hours ago. He was alone. Suddenly, a single phrase, repeated clearly through the static. "They are inside." Ethan froze. The studio doors slammed shut on their own. A chill swept through the room, frost forming on the microphone. Shaken, Ethan reviewed the recordings from previous nights. He discovered anomalies, distorted voices, faint screams hidden beneath his show's broadcast, and strange static patterns resembling faces. faces that seemed to scream silently. Digging deeper, he found notes left by former hosts, scribbled warnings on the scraps of paper. Do not respond to the calls. They will pull you in. The broadcast is a bridge. The listeners will be consumed. Ethan laughed nervously. He didn't believe them until the lights flickered and a shadow passed behind him. A call came again. This one different. A woman, barely audible. Ethan, they are inside the walls. The station, it's not what it seems. Static consumed her words. A sudden loud crash made him jump. The sound of glass breaking in the hallway outside. The studio door rattled violently. Ethan grabbed a flashlight and cautiously opened the door. The corridor stretched unnaturally long. The walls warped, twisting like a living maze. He returned to the studio. The microphone picked up whispers, not from the line, but from the air itself. Voices of listeners calling in from empty rooms, distorted, pleading, screaming for help. Ethan tried to turn off the transmitter. Nothing worked. The board hummed, cables writhing like snakes, screens lit up with images he had never seen, houses he didn't recognize, streets he didn't know, all bathed in darkness. And then he saw it, a shadow moving across the studio floor. Not human, limbs twisted, features obscured, but its eyes burned red. By 3 a.m., Ethan realized the phone lines were gone. Every attempt to call out ended in static. His only connection to the outside world was the broadcast itself. Listeners were calling back in numbers he had never dialed, from towns that didn't exist, reporting shadowy figures in their homes, each voice eerily similar, repeating the same phrase. He is here. He is inside. Ethan ran to the door, but the corridor stretched endlessly. No exit in sight. The studio had become a labyrinth, alive, feeding on fear. From the shadows, figures emerged. Former hosts, pale, hollow-eyed, mouths moving without sound. They reached toward him, their fingers unnaturally long. One figure whispered into his ear, though its lips never moved, "You are next. You signed the signal. You belong to the broadcast now." Ethan stumbled backward, tripping over cables, landing near the microphone. The voices in the studio crescendoed, overlapping in a deafening roar. He realized the broadcast itself had become a portal, a bridge between worlds. The listeners were trapped in some in-between dimension, screaming into his studio, reaching out through the airwaves. Panic surged as he searched for a way to stop it, but each attempt only made the whispers louder, the shadows more solid. The room pulsed, walls breathing, stretching, as if the station itself were alive. The red glow from the equipment grew intense, blinding him. The last thing he saw before blacking out was a distorted face pressed against the studio window, his own. Ethan awoke in darkness. The studio was silent, eerily silent, but the shadows lingered, stretching across the walls, curling around the equipment like living tendrils. He tried to stand, but his body felt heavy, numb, as if pulled downward by an invisible force. The microphone hummed faintly, then erupted in static. Through the noise, he could hear faint whispers. "Join us. You belong. Do not resist." He staggered to the console. Buttons, knobs, and dials moved on their own, glowing red, each light pulsating in sync with the voices. Desperate, Ethan found an old reel-to-reel tape, marked in faded ink. "Emergency. Do not play." The label trembled in his hands, as though alive. Against his better judgment, He played it. A low, guttural voice filled the studio. This is the station. We are many. The signal is eternal. There is no escape. Static exploded, nearly deafening him. When the hiss subsided, he realized the voice was not coming from the tape, but from inside his own skull. Ethan glimpsed the monitors. Faces appeared. Listeners frozen in terror, their eyes wide, their mouths moving, but no sound escaping. They were trapped inside the broadcast, visible through static and screens. Pleading silently, he tried to turn off the broadcast. Every switch he touched sparked and burned his hands. The shadows moved faster, reaching toward him, now tangible, solid, almost human, but twisted, warped, impossible. One of the figures approached, a man in a worn suit, pale, hollow-eyed, the face familiar, like a previous radio host. You cannot leave, the figure rasped. You are the signal now. The broadcast feeds on you. You warned them, but now you belong to it. Ethan's mind raced. His career, his life, everything had led to this moment, and now the air itself seemed to vibrate with the pulse of the station wrapping around him, squeezing him, forcing him to kneel before the microphone. Time warped. Hours became seconds. Seconds became hours. Ethan no longer knew if he had slept or been awake. The whispers grew louder, overlapping. They are here. They are inside. You are the signal. He stumbled through the darkened studio, dodging cables that moved like snakes, shadows that lunged at him from every corner. Every attempt to escape led him back to the microphone, as if the room itself were a living maze. The reel tape continued to spin on its own, and voices echoed over it, fragments of conversations from the living and the dead, merging into one horrifying chorus. Ethan realized what he must do. He had to transmit one final warning. If he could reach the airwaves, maybe some listeners would escape. He pressed the button. Static erupted across the frequency. Ethan screamed into the microphone, words tumbling out frantically. Do not answer. Do not listen. It is inside your home, your walls. Do not respond. The shadows screamed along with him, a cacophony of voices layered over his own. The studio seemed to collapse, bending around him, floor becoming ceiling, equipment floating in midair. Suddenly, a cold, invisible hand gripped his shoulder. Ethan spun. Nothing but the weight remained, pulling him toward the console. He tried to resist. He screamed, but the broadcast had become more than sound. It was a physical force, a bridge connecting him to the trapped, to the shadows, to something older, darker than he could comprehend. His reflection in the monitor no longer looked like him. It was pale, twisted, eyes black as void, mouth moving without sound, repeating, Join us, join us, join us. Ethan lunged for the emergency exit. The studio seemed endless now, hallways stretching into infinity. Shadows lunged at him, fingertips brushing his skin. The monitors showed flashes of his home, his friends, his car, twisting images, warning him the broadcast could reach anywhere. He slammed the exit door. It opened into a cold alleyway, fog rolling in. For a brief moment, freedom. Then he saw them, hundreds of shadowy figures, faces distorted, silent screams trapped forever, emerging from the mist, moving toward him. Ethan ran, clutching the tape, holding it like a talisman. Behind him, the figures multiplied, the whispers screaming, He is ours. He is the signal now. Join us. In a desperate act, he jammed the tape into the transmitter. Sparks flew. Static roared. The air cracked. A wave of sound blasted outward, rippling through the town. The shadows hesitated, screaming into the void, then dissipated. The fog lifted, silence returned. Ethan woke in the studio, alone. The equipment was silent. The tape lay on the floor, smoking slightly. No shadows, no whispers, only the faint hum of the building. He had survived, but at a cost. His voice had changed. Sometimes, late at night, it carried echoes, whispers, not his own, and occasionally, when he tuned in to his own frequency from home, he heard a faint, ghostly static. Do not answer. Do not listen. The signal never ends. Ethan quit the show, moved far away, but radio static followed him. Phones whispered strange words. Electronic devices flickered with faces he could not recognize. And somewhere, in the vast airwaves, the signal waited for the next host, the next listener, because some broadcasts are eternal.